having a discussion right now on the impact of COVID on the auto mobility industry. And then we'll move into our first set of startup presentations right after that. So with that, let's go ahead and bring up our panelists. So you can go ahead and turn your videos on now, please. We have Jim Adler, the Managing Director of Toyota AI Ventures, Marc Amblard, the Managing Director of Orsay Consulting, Yvonne Lutsch, the Investment Principal at Robert Bosch, who I think, and Yvonne, I think, is still making her way into the room. We'll get to her shortly. And then Miriam Roure, the Principal at UrbanX. So, you know, a lot has happened throughout the course of the year in the auto mobility tech space, and Howard alluded to quite a few of those in his opening remarks. Obviously COVID is top of mind there, and that's where we're going to begin our day. So we're now over a year into the COVID era, and a question I'd like to pose to all of our panelists is, in your view, how has this period changed the auto tech sector, and what has remained the same? I know we talk a lot about that things that are happening all around the world in auto tech due to COVID. But as far as I know, from talking to a lot of investors, a lot has remained the same. So I'd love to just really start this off with that question at the top of the mind. Miriam, I'm going to turn to you first, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. And I just want to thank, obviously, Howard and you, Nick, for including me. And maybe I'll introduce myself briefly as well. My name is Miriam Roure. I'm the program director and principal at UrbanX, and UrbanX is a venture accelerator for startups reimagining city life that was built by Mini from the BMW Group, and also powered by Urban Us, which is a venture fund dedicated to also urban technologies and climate. And yeah, together over the last 4 years, we've invested in 64 companies, all very early stage, across all sectors pertaining to what one would call like an urban environment. So it definitely investing in mobility, but beyond mobility as well. And yeah, I would say that COVID has changed what normal living means for many people. And in many ways, it has also brought to the forefront the importance of climate change. And to your question, I think the main change from an OEM perspective, without getting into numbers, but that it has put more pressure to electrify, connect, and make autonomous with fewer resources. So there's added pressure there. So that's a big change that we're seeing, is a big pressure there. At the same time, from a venture perspective, as you were pointing out, invested capital in the venture space has remained the same or even increased. We're seeing lots of activity right now. So that's like the flip side of the coin, is there's tons of activity. There's tons of capital being invested currently in mobility, but and beyond. And then I think just something that from within the venture space, like something that has been deeply affected, I would say, within mobility is shared mobility is obviously something that has been put in pause. But my thesis is it's definitely coming back, and it's coming back stronger than it was before. So so yeah, I think there's some skepticism right now, but the companies are well positioned in the future in that space. I think will have there might be a great opportunity there.
And Marc, why don't you just continue it from there, maybe briefly introduce yourself and tell you about what you've seen this past year.
Sure, thanks, Nick. Yeah, briefly, my name is Marc Amblard. I have 25 plus years of experience in the automotive industry. I've also worked in the rail sector for a few years. I'm based in Palo Alto, in Silicon Valley, and I have a strategic advisory activity business that is 100% dedicated to mobility and auto tech. I advise corporates and startups in Europe, Japan, and the US in automotive and mobility-related issues across a number of elements, from scouting to pure strategic advisory to events within corporates, and so there's certainly a lot going on. Back to your question, Nick. Several things I see. First, one thing that mentioned Miriam is electrification. Certainly, as a result of a number of things, including increased perception on what it is to see clean air, to incentive to the automotive industry. This is all impacting significantly the electrification, accelerated electrification of the mobility space. Second thing is also the transfer, the modal shift that we've seen from transit to micromobility in some regions, to back to vehicles, to cars in other regions. That certainly also has something that will have a lasting impact. I would say a third thing, just to stick to a short answer, is e-commerce growth. That has had significant impact on, it's certainly something we've seen growing over the years, but we've seen a significant boost in 2020 that will get us farther ahead, with significant impact on things like electric van. Rivian and GM recently, and Arrival and others that are introducing electric vans in large quantities. So this, just in a nutshell, these are things that I would see would have been significantly impacted by COVID.
Great. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that. And Jim, let's turn over to you. Please give us a brief introduction, and then go ahead and tell us what you've seen this past year.
Sure, thanks, Nick. I'm Jim Adler. I'm the founding managing director of Toyota AI Ventures. We're Toyota's first dedicated venture capital fund. We have $200 million under management, 37 companies in the portfolio. We are very much structured like an institutional venture capital fund. Fast decision making, separate company, very founder forward. And so we've really been quite active this past year through COVID. I do think there's a question of how long, is this a new normal or not? I kind of analogize it to a flywheel, right? Is this enough impulsive force for long enough to actually start to move the flywheel in some of these markets? And I'll try to stick with mobility metaphors today exclusively if I can. But if you look at the companies that are experiencing headwinds or tailwinds or turbulence, or maybe on a glide path, I think I think Miriam mentioned, headwinds around ride hailing, ride sharing. However, on the tailwind side, personally operated mobility is up. Car sales are up. Anytime you're operating your own vehicle, whether that be a moped or a scooter or a bike, those mobility modes are up. We're an investor in Rebel that I think you're going to hear from later today. And they saw a great banner year last year. On the turbulent side, public transportation is struggling for sure. We have an investment in May Mobility, but they've adapted pretty well with sanitation processes and limiting passengers to a household bubble. And so startups are great at reacting. They're quite anti-fragile, to steal from Nassim Taleb, and they've done some amazing innovations during this period. I think on the glide path side, autonomy has not really been all that affected by COVID, mostly because the technology is in many respects still in the lab and not quite in the market yet. And so we saw some of the air come out of that hype cycle a bit and some consolidation. But those of us that have been a little sanguine about autonomy continue to see those advances and those strides. And I think we're going to see disruption likely in a post-COVID era. And then finally, on the runway side, we're seeing new business models emerge. I think the technology is mature enough that you're seeing these explosion of business models. And last year we did an investment in Bippy, which is a flexible car rental subscription service. So you're starting to see, along with the new work modes, you're seeing new buying modes as well, where people want their mobility by the drink, where they want it, online, and all bundled in a service.
Wow. That's something else. So new business models emerging, and we have this constant question of, is this the new normal, or is this just the now normal, and are we returning to the old normal eventually? It seems. And then just as a way to continue this conversation, or to introduce some of these topics, I'd like to hear Marc and Miriam talk about what's really changed in cities over the past year. what are we seeing now, and are we expecting these changes that in urban centers to continue after COVID? Miriam, why don't you just start again?
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the most exciting things for me has been the importance of public space. So what has happened with COVID has completely unlocked the opportunity of reimagining public space. And I'm talking about space for pedestrians, outdoor dining, green spaces, but also like space for bicycles, as micromobility, planning for parking and deliveries and personal mobility services. And we have to take into account like streets hadn't really changed in over 100 years. And so this is something that I think there was some traction already in the market for, especially from the micromobility side, to say like, hey, things need to change, we need to reimagine. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden, some of these things were able to be implemented and changed. And basically, it's just the idea of like, yes, things can change, right? And this has been really like a city by city case. Some cities have really taken advantage of this and some cities haven't. So we see like Barcelona completely blocking off blocks at a time and activating them in different ways. Paris like really embracing like 15-minute city concept, but many US cities, second tier cities, haven't really changed that much. So it has really been like a case by case situation, but generally speaking, it has proven that streetscapes can change and should probably change if we're going to embrace different kinds of mobility in the future. That on the one hand. On the other hand, I would say it has brought to the forefront the inequality that is baked into our cities and how they're planned. And transportation and mobility options are a big part of that as well. I mean, I think like what Jim was pointing out, shared transportation, public transportation are really suffering. And that again has to do with, that really affects people who need to still commute within cities and are extra exposed to the effects of COVID. So that is a challenge I think has been brought to the forefront, as I said, but something that needs to be addressed in the future as well, like today, but definitely in the future as well.
Right. Yeah. This idea that that COVID really pushes us to take on long-awaited shifts and long.
Yeah.
It is really true with urban infrastructure, and it seems like a lot of these trends that have been building now for the past 5 to 10 years are really coming to a head because of COVID. Marc, where do you sit with this question of what's been shifting within cities? You have an eye into Europe. Have you seen big changes in how European cities are reacting to COVID versus in the US?
I mean, I certainly agree with what Miriam was saying, and I would just start look at it from different perspective, just to add some comments to it. Two things that for me are driving what we're seeing is, one is obviously the contactless distancing, and that has resulted in a massive reduction in ridership on public transit. We've seen drops like 80, 90%. We're still seeing, and at the end of 2020, we're looking at statistics in Europe, we still now do see like 50% reduction. Some of it obviously comes from remote working, but this a significant portion that comes from distance, staying away from public transit. I was looking at stats from Paris, or a survey was done in 2020. 30% of usual riders are saying that they're not going to come back anytime soon. So this is a lasting impact. The second angle I'm going to look at it from is clean air. We've all seen the impact of reduction in passenger mile kilometers or passengers by miles traveled in cities. Blue slides across the board, reduction in O2, reduction in particulate matters, and it's something that will leave a lasting impact in people's minds. And so if we combine those two things, we see, and depend on the region in Europe, certainly where public transit is and will remain the backbone of transportation in urban areas. We've seen a shift away from that, at least temporary, and that shift is going to biking. We see a massive boost in e-bike sales, increased consumption in shared biking, and to a lesser extent, possibly scooters, but these are things that will accelerate, and it's going to stay. We've seen possibly doubling in bike sales in regions. In the US, where public transit is less of a thing, we are, the shift has been unfortunately back to cars. So Jim was saying, increasing sales. Yes, unfortunately, I would say, I worked for the automotive industry for many, many years. And so I would still say this, unfortunately, for the sake of the future of the planet, unless, and this is the third pillar of it, we're moving to clean vehicles, which is something we've seen again back to Europe. The governments have increased incentives to electric vehicles. It's the carrot, it's not the stick at this point, at least. Well, there's a bit of the stick with increase in CO2 pressure, 95 grams per kilometer per vehicle starting this year, and that will keep pushing towards electric vehicles. We've seen incentives up to 11,000 euros. That's what, $13,000 in Germany, 10,000 euros in France, compared to was it 6,000 euros in the US at federal level, plus another 1,500, 2,000 euros to stick to the same unit in maybe up to 15 states. So there's still a major gap, and where we've seen a tripling in the penetration of electric vehicles in Europe in 2020 versus 2019, and we're now in the vertical part of the S curve, we only see a marginal increase in the US. So.
Yeah, wonderful. And just to switch briefly to the investment side, Jim, what have you seen in auto tech investing over the past year, and have you personally shifted the way that you look at companies?
Yeah, one way to look at the last 12 months is it was not a typical, but clearly a business downturn, a deep downturn for sure, but a business cycle like any other business cycle. It's hard to, the business cycle is going to come. You just don't know what's going to cause it. As Warren Buffett says, Noah didn't get credit for predicting rain, but he got credit for building the ark. And so when we structured the fund in 2017, we structured it for downturns. The reason we structured this as a separate investment fund with a typical institutional venture capital, GPLP capital call structure was so that we could be active during the downturns when prices are better and there's quite a bit of actually new innovative activity. If you look at each of the big downturns, say the dot-com bubble in 2000 and the downturn, the financial crisis in 2009, some great companies came out of that era, both those eras. And so we think every downturn, the beauty of capitalism is that things get destroyed, but things get created. And so we were quite active last year. I think we did 8 new deals, which is a little less, but only by 1 or 2 than we typically do in a year. We did several follow-ons and some big follow-ons, but you're going to have to do deals over Zoom, over this medium, over the 2-dimensional screen, and that's a problem. Or at least a challenge. There used to be an adage, and maybe there is, and still some VC firms, that if you can't drive to the board meeting, you don't do the investment. I think that's gone away, and I think good riddance to that, because I believe fundamentally that talent is evenly distributed around the globe, but unfortunately capital is not. And one of the COVID dividends, I think, is it's forcing us to pull talent from all over the world and empower that talent with capital. And I think that is a good thing. And so what does that mean? Well, you have to get to know people over this 2-dimensional medium. You have to have more of these calls. But that hasn't really slowed down venture capital activity, actually. We saw a little bit in valuation drop in the March, April, May timeframe, but things have popped back up. I think Miriam had mentioned that. Things have popped back pretty well. And I think you're going to continue to see that. We're still seeing, our close rate is somewhere between 1 and 1.5% of the 1,000 or so deals that we see every year. And I'm encouraged by the fact that we're doing more deals in Europe and Israel and Canada with more diverse founders. And I think it's actually kind of an exciting time. So out of all the sorrow that many of us have gone through this last year, we can find a way to learn some lessons and learn some new tricks and maybe empower people that haven't been previously.
Yeah, that's right. And the investors in Silicon Valley now need to sort of take their blinders off and put their heads up, look at the rest of the world, and see all these opportunities that maybe previously weren't really accessible, or at least deemed accessible to them. Looks like Yvonne, you are on. Apologies for the technical delays. Thank you for your patience with us.
Yeah, finally I made it.
Wonderful. Well, maybe this is a good place for you to jump on. So Yvonne is the investment principal at Robert Bosch, so a great counterpart to Jim's comments here. So maybe we could just take Jim's question and let's hear your thoughts on that. The automobility tech investing space, you've been working in this for quite some time. How's it changed over the past year? And do you see some of these change as fundamental and permanent, or just lasting until the end of the cycle?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very, very interesting ride the last year, right? There were many things happening. So first of all, everyone was taking care of his own portfolio and trying to refinance or to bridge finance the good portfolio companies. This is what we perceived. Everyone was busy with that. And then actually things came back to almost normal, except that you are not meeting in person, very quickly. And then we actually saw an acceleration in deals, not necessarily only in the automobility space, because Bosch is investing, or Robert Bosch Venture Capital is investing, also in industrial IoT, in consumer electronics, in cloud platform areas. And there actually we saw an acceleration and a large competition in deals. So we actually realized it's as a corporate VC, it's probably even more difficult to get in good deals, since everyone is so busy. No one has to travel. There is no waste of time because of travel or sitting in commute. So everyone is like doing deals like crazy. I mean, deals were closed where we got wanted to get in, and the deal was closed like within a week with 4 competitive term sheets, and then we probably were left out. So this was really an acceleration. And the second trend we saw is that, at least for the larger deals, maybe too large for us because we are investing rather early, is that this SPAC reverse mergers actually came up as a competition to large regular VC rounds. And then it's like, if you have a portfolio company which is in the LiDAR space and is not going through a SPAC merger, then your company already looks bad. So this is actually a very, very interesting development, which was like, maybe it was not really a coincidence with COVID, right? It was also, the SPAC race was accelerated with COVID. So yeah, interesting times, but we did not slow down our investments, not at all.
Good. And SPAC will definitely be a topic of the financing panel we'll have later today. So we'll leave that a little to them. Jim, in our prep call, you mentioned something interesting that I wanted to touch on, and maybe we'll have the other panelists respond to this idea as well. And Marc, in your original comments, you also mentioned this idea, and that is the EV urban congestion micro mobility confluence. So this idea that these changing forces, both the technological changes that are occurring, as well as these shifts we're seeing due to COVID, that are causing us to rethink the sacrifices we make around urban congestion and these new micro mobility solutions. It's all coming to a head. Jim, maybe you can just talk a little bit about what you mean behind this thesis and how it's impacted the way that you look at investment opportunities.
Yeah, sure. So the inspiration for this is, they asked Jeff Bezos years ago, like, how'd you predict all this? How'd you know it was all going to happen? He said, there's really no prediction about it. It was just consumers wanted variety, they wanted convenience, and they wanted to pay the lowest price. You know, those things are not going to change over time. And so I think similarly and analogously, you look at the principles of clean mobility, efficient mobility, affordable mobility. And we are, especially in urban areas, we are struggling to make sure that our mobility modes are clean. And I think COVID actually has shown how clean they could be, how in many urban areas, the smog has risen and things are so much cleaner now. And we want to, I think, maintain that, especially given climate change. I think congestion is a big deal, and deadhead empty seats just contribute to congestion. So when you look at using the public spaces more efficiently, Miriam's talked about having places to walk and work and play in urban environments means that you can't have a car's worth of real estate with only one person in it. And that argues to break up the car into mopeds and bikes and other micromobility modes so that you make the best use of the urban space you have. And then finally, the nice thing about these business models, be they service models or micromobility models, is affordability for a broad swath of the population. We had my son and some friends out for the holidays, socially distanced and safe, of course. And they're from New York. Revel is now part of their lifestyle, right? They're 20-something, very diverse group of kids. And they found Revel here in San Francisco, and now it's part of their mindset. And it's clean, and it's efficient, and it's affordable. And I think you're going to see that more. These three dimensions kind of conflating into successful solutions.
Wonderful, and I love the plug for your portfolio company. It's always good to be their champion. So quickly, we have a few minutes left, but I want to just continue this idea a little further. Miriam, in your work with startups focusing specifically on urban innovation, have you seen the movement in this area? Has this changed the way you look at companies, and has there been a priority placed on this urban congestion micromobility confluence we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the thesis. I think I'll keep it brief, but basically I like the idea of infrastructure. I often my thesis tends to be around what is the infrastructure that supports all of these shiny changes in many ways. And so for us, I would there's I can think of 4 companies in that infrastructure kind of category to support all of these different trends that we have invested in. One of them you're going to hear about later. It's Eva and the founder Olivier. Well, yes, I think he's participating in a couple of sessions. But yeah, it's infrastructure for drones. And yes, there's tons of different applications, tons of different devices, and so on. But how do you create the infrastructure to enable for all of this to happen and be implemented at scale? Another one is Mobilize for planning for EV infrastructure. Yes, we know electric is coming, but where do you have those chargers and why, and how is that part of the urban infrastructure? That's another really key issue, and many people are at it have no idea. Okay, yes, or cities yes, we know we need these, but where do we even put this and why? And how do they integrate into the existing electric infrastructure as well is super important. And then another one is OONEE, OONEE, which is infrastructure for bicycle parking. And that one kind of relates to a lot of the things that we were saying with the changes due to COVID. But yeah, in New York, it's there's one parking spot for bicycles for every, I don't know if it's 3,000 bicycles or something like that. And obviously I lived in the Netherlands for some time, and it's radically different. So anyways, lots of work to be done there. And the final one that I'll mention is Xtelligent, which is, it has to do with the notion of congestion and connected infrastructure and autonomous vehicles. It's building the layer to be able to connect these and be able to effectively also reduce congestion massively by being able to connect our physical infrastructure to the vehicles and make it all seamless.
Great. Just to keep an eye on the time here, Mark, maybe you could just take that a little bit further and your own take on that. The rise of EVs, CO2 mandates within cities, alternate transportation models emerging. What have you seen in this area, and do you see these trends as lasting longer than COVID?
This build on what Miriam was saying, certainly with the increase in micromobility, and I'll take a number of cities in Europe, for instance, Miriam mentioned Barcelona, we have Milan and Paris and other cities, to a lesser extent in the US as well. We've seen a drastic increase in protected bike lanes. At the same time, obviously that takes over space that was previously dedicated to vehicles. So that in the short term tends to increase congestion, but alongside as well removal of parking spaces at street level. At the same time, so that makes space for new city furniture, as in charging and docking networks. With that as well come other things such as the possibility to battery swapping. That's certainly for short term, for bikings and scooters. So again, additional city furniture to address that. To some extent as well, we're going to see an increased amount of street level charging for EVs. We've seen London, for instance, with street light based charging systems. We'll see also pop-ups from the sidewalks, and this is quite a bit of creativity going on in EV charging in urban areas, between again battery swapping, which is something that's been testing and failed for passenger cars, at least certainly in Europe. But again, for other smaller vehicles. So I suspect there's going to be an increased level of activity in this space.
Great. And Yvonne, I would want to have you address that question, but we're just out of time. But Jags had a good question that came through the chat here that I just wanted to have your take on, and then maybe finish up with Jim's take as well. Has the timeline changed in making a decision given COVID? And I'll take this as an investment decision. Is the timeline from when you first meet a startup to when you write that check, has that shifted at all?
I think I answered the question already. We see an acceleration very clearly because people have just more time to sit on the phones and to have Zoom meetings, and not like in the past. We went to the startup, we visited them in their office, and we had this full day, meeting, 33, degree, everything checking. And now you have like a Zoom meeting here and a Zoom meeting there, and you can do this. Like in 1-2 days, you can have many meetings. So it's very accelerated.
That's right.
That's what we see.
Okay, thank you. And one final question comes through. I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted to put this one in. Sebastian in the Q&A, he asks, what did we learn from COVID? How we went to use the time on the road when we're back. So what lessons did we learn from COVID? And what are we really going to stick with us? What are we going to remember this era for when we look back at it 5 or 10 years ago in the automobility tech space? Maybe I'll have all of you take 20 seconds and answer that question. Maybe I'll start with you, Jim.
Yeah, I think the lessons are still being digested. I think that certain things that we have accelerated, as we talked about. I think that congestion will come back. There's huge economic incentives. I think 68% of the world's population will live in urban centers by 2050. I don't think that's going to change all that much. So what are you going to do? You can't build more roads. You can't go underground. You're going to have to go up or use the space better. Joby is one of our companies, which I think you talked about, that is trying to go up with air mobility. And so this is a reprieve to see what does lack of congestion look like, but I think it's coming right back as soon as we get the green light, and that's going to require a bunch of innovation.
Great. Miriam, 20 seconds. What are the lessons from COVID?
Yeah, I think it's also a year of climate change in so many ways, and so I think that will percolate. That percolates in many different ways, and yeah, I think that's what comes to mind.
Great, I love it. Mark?
Muted, Mark.
Mark, you're muted.
Mark.
Sorry, yes, sorry. Yeah, I would say again, if there are obvious elephants in the room, and it's something that's been in our face for many years. Again, it's our planet, and it's something we've relentlessly we've refused to face. Or at least many have refused to face, and all of a sudden realize what it means also to have clean air, to have to be able to walk around cities and so forth. So it's something that if there's something so obvious, let's just address it and not go around it.
Great. All right, Yvonne, bring us home. What are the early lessons that you've learned?
So I hope that Jim is not right, and I hope that the congestion is not going up like crazy again in the Bay Area.
Me too.
I hope and I feel like, if we have a meeting with a startup in San Francisco, I'm in the South Bay, I probably check the traffic, and if the traffic is bad, I just do a Zoom meeting, because we learned that Zoom meetings can work and are very effective. So that's how I just hope that the traffic is not going so bad again. And the second important message, I think, is that, for example, with regards to autonomy, I think there is a slowdown in developments for privately owned vehicles, because that's not the predominant problem anymore, because currently the traffic is lower. But there is a shift, because there's a shift to last mile delivery. And this will become and has to become autonomous to be profitable for the companies who do that. So there's just, if technology is great, it will find its way.
Wonderful. That's a great way to end this session. Miriam, Mark, Yvonne, Jim, thank you all so much for your time this morning and for kicking us off to start what's going to be a fun-filled day.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vic.
Yep.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. All right.